The distant planet of Valeris had always been a mystery. It was known in the galaxy, not for its beauty or wealth, but for the strange and ancient structure buried deep beneath its surface. For centuries, it had remained hidden, untouched, and unstudied. That was, until now, humanity, ever curious and hungry for power, had discovered it. A team of scientists, explorers, and engineers had made the remarkable find, and now they stood on the surface of Valeris, gazing at the entrance to the most mysterious structure ever uncovered. The team had been sent to explore, to uncover the secrets of this ancient gate, but no one truly understood what lay ahead. The gate was massive, carved into the very rock of the planet, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings that none of them could decipher. The only thing they knew for sure was that the gate was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered before. It was not built by any known species, and it didn't match anything in the galaxy's records. Its origins were completely unknown. Weeks the team had been studying the gate from afar, using advanced scanning technology to examine the structure, but every scan seemed to reveal more questions than answers. The gate was solid, impenetrable, and it radiated an energy that none of their instruments could explain. The power readings fluctuated, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, but they always seemed to come from within, as if something was quietly waiting inside. On this day, the team had decided to take things further. A decision had been made. They would attempt to open it. Dr. Carla Martinez, the lead scientist on the mission, stood at the front, her hand raised as she gave the final command. "Activate the core," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of excitement. "It's time to find out what's inside." Her team moved quickly, connecting their equipment to the energy source of the gate. They had theorized that the power within the gate was somehow linked to an ancient energy that only a few civilizations in the galaxy had mastered. For them, opening the gate was an achievement, something that could elevate humanity to new heights. But none of them understood the true cost of what they were about to do. As the machines hummed to life, the symbols on the gate began to glow. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, but then, as the machines worked, the glow intensified. A low rumble echoed through the ground beneath their feet, sending a chill through everyone present. It was as if the planet itself was waking up. The rumble grew louder, more intense. The gate's symbols began to move, shifting and rearranging themselves like living things. It was a spectacle and overwhelming, otherworldly experience that left the scientists in awe. But beneath their fascination, a sense of unease began to settle in the air. "What's happening?" someone whispered, their voice trembling. "The gate, it's alive." Martinez glanced at her team, a flicker of concern crossing her face. She had expected something, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The energy emanating from the gate was no longer just a reading, it was an undeniable force, pushing against their equipment, challenging their control. The gate's surface began to crack, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the cracks spread like a web across its massive surface. The sound of grinding metal filled the air, and a bright flash of light erupted from within the cracks. The team stepped back, their faces filled with awe and fear, unsure whether to retreat or press forward. This is what we've been waiting for," Martinez muttered, her eyes wide. She couldn't pull her gaze away from the shifting gate. Her mind raced with thoughts of discovery, of the answers that lay beyond. But she was wrong. They hadn't been prepared for what was about to happen. The ground beneath their feet shook violently. The rumbling grew louder, almost deafening, and the sky above them darkened. A deep guttural sound echoed through the air, like a beast awakening from a long slumber. The temperature dropped suddenly, the air becoming thick with tension. Then, with a deafening crash, the gate began to open. At first, it was just a small gap, but the gap widened quickly, revealing a swirling dark vortex inside. It wasn't a doorway to another world, it was a doorway to something much more dangerous. The team's excitement turned to fear as the vortex pulsed with an unnatural energy, drawing them in, pulling at their minds. It was as if the gate was hungry for something, waiting for the right moment to unleash its power. "Get back, everyone, get back," Martinez shouted. But it was too late. The vortex surged, its pull becoming stronger, its presence overwhelming. The team scrambled to retreat, but the force of the gate's awakening was unstoppable. The last thing they saw before they turned to run was the glowing eyes of the gate, eyes that had been closed for millennia but were now wide open, gazing into the souls of the humans who dared to awaken it. And in that moment, they all realized what they had truly unleashed. The gate was not just a door. It was a prison that had held something far worse than they could have ever imagined. Something that had been buried for a reason. The true horror had only just begun. As the team stumbled back, the ground continued to tremble beneath their feet, and the noise from the gate grew louder, almost as if it were speaking to them, echoing across the surface of the planet. The vortex inside the gate pulsed with an eerie, unnatural light, swirling with colors no human eye had ever seen. Each flash was like a warning, a sign that something ancient and powerful was now awake and ready to make its presence known. Dr. Carla Martinez, the leader of the team, stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the fear creeping up her spine, but she refused to back down. They had come this far, and she wasn't about to let it all fall apart now. This was history, this was the moment that would define humanity's place in the universe. But as she stared at the glowing vortex, a gnawing feeling deep inside told her that they had made a terrible mistake. Her team members were already scrambling to secure the area, trying to contain the energy readings that were now off the charts. The equipment was malfunctioning, the screens flickering wildly as if they, too, were afraid. The air was thick with tension, and a cold chill had settled over the entire site. "Get the shields up," one of the engineers shouted, his voice shaking. "We need to contain the energy spike now," but it was too late. The gate had already begun to open wider, revealing what lay within. A shadow began to emerge from the swirling vortex. At first it was small, barely visible, but then it grew, its outline becoming clearer. It was dark, almost too dark, a shadow that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was alive, moving, shifting with every moment. The very air around it seemed to bend and warp, as if it were a part of the darkness itself. A low growl echoed from the depths of the vortex, deep and rumbling, like the sound of something stirring from a long, forgotten slumber. The ground beneath them shook again, more violently this time. The team scrambled, trying to react, but every instinct told them to run to escape before whatever was coming could reach them. Martinez finally snapped out of her trance and shouted, "Everyone, fall back to the shuttle now." The team hesitated, but only for a moment. They didn't need to be told twice. With terror in their eyes, they turned and rushed toward the safety of the shuttle. But as they did, the shadow that had emerged from the gate grew larger, more defined. It was not just one shadow anymore, it was a mass, a dark force that seemed to be made of smoke and shadows, moving faster than anything they could understand. Then, with a deafening crash, something massive slammed into the ground near them, sending shockwaves through the entire area. The earth cracked open beneath their feet as a huge, shadowy figure rose from the depths of the gate, its shape barely visible in the darkness. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, with elongated limbs and a face that was a grotesque mix of alien features and nightmarish shapes. It didn't belong to this world. That the team froze. A deep, guttural voice echoed in their minds, as if the creature was speaking directly to their thoughts. The words were unintelligible, a language older than time itself, but the meaning was clear. "You have awakened what was never meant to be seen, and now, you will pay the price." Martinez stumbled backward, her eyes wide in disbelief. This was not what they had expected. The beings from the gate, they were not just guardians or protectors, they were something much worse. They were powerful, ancient creatures who had been sealed away for a reason, and now, they were free. "Run," Martinez screamed, her voice hoarse. But it was too late. The shadowy figure moved with terrifying speed, its limbs stretching unnaturally, its form warping as it rushed toward them. The team scattered, their movements chaotic and desperate, but the darkness seemed to follow them, closing in with every step. The shuttle was still a few hundred meters away, but with every passing second, it felt like the distance was growing longer, the path more treacherous. One of the engineers, Greg, was the first to reach the shuttle, but just as he grabbed the door handle, a dark tendril shot out from the figure and wrapped around his waist. He screamed in terror, his body lifted off the ground, and before anyone could react, he was pulled into the darkness, disappearing into the void. "Greg!" A voice screamed from behind, but the figure didn't stop. It didn't even acknowledge their cries. The tendrils continued to lash out, slamming into the ground, cracking the earth beneath them with each strike. Martinez felt her chest tighten. This was not just an enemy. This was a force of nature, an ancient power that had been locked away for a reason. She had to make a choice: stay and fight, or run and live to warn others. But deep down, she knew that no one was going to survive this encounter unscathed. The rest of the team was still running, their footsteps pounding on the rocky surface as they desperately made their way toward the shuttle. But with every step, the darkness seemed to consume everything in its path. The world around them was being swallowed up, the very ground beneath them cracking and crumbling like the planet itself was dying. Finally, with one last push, they reached the shuttle. Martinez slammed her hand on the button, activating the doors. The team rushed inside, but before anyone could catch their breath, the dark figure lunged at them, its shadowy form filling the shuttle's VIEWPORTS. As the doors slammed shut, Martinez could still hear the creature's voice, echoing, in their minds, "You cannot escape, you have awoken the gate, and now, you will face what lies beyond." The shuttle lifted off the ground, rocketing into the sky, but the darkness didn't fade. It followed them, an ever-present force that would soon change everything they knew about the universe. The team had unleashed something far worse than they could have ever imagined, and now, the galaxy would feel its wrath. The shuttle sped through the atmosphere, but it felt like they were running from something far worse than any enemy. The creature's dark tendrils had only been the beginning. The real danger wasn't what they had seen, but what was still following them, unseen, just out of reach. It wasn't just a physical threat. It was a deep, primal fear that gnawed at their souls, a fear that told them they had unleashed something so ancient, so powerful, that nothing in the galaxy could stop it. The shuttle ascended higher. The planet of Valeris grew smaller beneath them, but the shadows from the gate still lingered in their minds. Martinez sat at the front, her hands gripping the control panel, trying to focus. The voices of her team echoed in her head, their fear palpable, but there was no time to comfort them. There was no time for anything but survival. The shuttle's engine roared, cutting through the thick atmosphere, and finally, they were free of the planet. But even as the stars stretched out before them, the sense of dread didn't fade. They had made it off Valeris, but the dark presence was still there, watching them, following them through the vast emptiness of space. "It's not over," Martinez muttered under her breath. "It's never over." A voice from the back of the shuttle broke through her thoughts. It was Greg's, or what was left of him. "Carla," he said, his voice low and trembling. "I don't think we're alone." Martinez turned, her heart skipping a beat. Greg was sitting in one of the rear seats, his body shuddering uncontrollably. He looked pale, his face covered in a sheen of sweat, and his eyes were wide with fear. It was as if he had seen something in the depths of space, something he couldn't escape. "We need to talk," he continued, his voice almost a whisper. I saw it after it took me ... I saw its eyes, and it spoke to me. It's not just one creature. It's a whole army." Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach tighten with dread. "What do you mean? An army?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though every word felt like it weighed a ton. Greg swallowed hard. "It's not just one being. The gate hits a gateway, not just to another world. It's a portal to an entire realm, a realm filled with beings like that one, and they're coming. I felt it, Carla. They're already on their way." The silence in the shuttle was deafening. The only sound was the hum of the engines, which now felt far less reassuring. If Greg's words were true, they weren't just fleeing from one creature. They were fleeing from an invasion that had been waiting for millennia, sealed away for a reason. Martinez shook her head. "That can't be. We're in space. The gate can't reach us here." Greg's gaze didn't leave hers. The gate wasn't just a door, it was a warning that the creatures locked inside would be freed when the time was right, and that time is now. "They're coming, Carla, and we have no idea how to stop them." Martinez clenched her fists. She didn't want to believe him, but deep down, she knew he was right. The shadows, the creatures, they weren't just figments of their imagination. They were real, and they were after them. After all of humanity. "We need to warn the fleet," Martinez said, her voice now filled with urgency. "We need to get back to Earth. This is bigger than just us now. The entire galaxy is at risk." But as she spoke, her mind was racing. Could they really make it to Earth? Would they even make it out of this sector of space before the creatures caught up with them? She knew that time was running out. The creatures they had awakened weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted, and nothing in the universe was going to stand in their way. The rest of the team was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts, trying to come to terms with the horrifying truth. The gate was more than just a relic. It was a Pandora's box, and they had opened it. They had unleashed something that would change everything, and now, they had to live with the consequences. Suddenly, the shuttle shook violently, sending everyone lurching forward. The engines sputtered, and the warning lights began flashing. Martinez's heart raced as she scrambled to stabilize the shuttle. "What the hell?" she shouted, slamming her hand down on the console, but the system was unresponsive. The shuttle was losing power fast. The sky outside the window began to flicker, and for a moment, Martinez could have sworn she saw something moving in the distance, a shadow. growing larger. "It's them," Greg whispered. His voice was strained, barely audible over the hum of the shuttle's failing systems. "They're here." The shuttle jerked again, harder this time, and the lights flickered once more. Martinez could hear the frantic breathing of her team in the back, but all she could focus on was the screen in front of her. The shadow outside had grown larger, closer. It was as if the creatures had found them, tracked them down across the vastness of space. "We're not going to make it," one of the engineers said, his voice trembling. "We can't outrun them." Martinez felt the weight of those words. The creatures they had awakened didn't just have power, they had the ability to track them across space itself. The gate had connected them, and now, there was no escape. There was one thing she knew for certain. If they were going to die, they weren't going to die alone. They were going to take the fight to the creatures. She wasn't going to let them wipe out humanity without a fight. "Prepare for emergency." "Landing," Martinez yelled, her voice filled with determination. "We need to find a way to fight back." The shuttle lurched again, this time with a force that nearly threw them out of their seats. The creatures had arrived. The shuttle hurtled through the blackness of space, its systems flickering like a dying star. Martinez could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had led her team into this disaster, and now she had to get them out of it. But no matter how fast they flew, how far they ran, the creatures from the gate seemed to be one step ahead, closing in with every passing moment. "Carla, the engines aren't going to hold," shouted Greg from the back of the shuttle. His face was pale, sweat dripping from his forehead, and his eyes wide with panic. "We've got a limited amount of fuel left. If we don't make it to the nearest station, we're done." Martinez tightened her grip on the control panel, fighting, the panic rising in her chest. They didn't have time to find a station. Time was running out. Her mind raced as she glanced at the ship's radar. They were already in the outskirts of the sector, far from any help. There was no place to hide, no safe zone, only the expanse of space, and the monstrous threat that was now chasing them. She tried to focus on the task at hand, ignoring the cold sweat that ran down her back. "We can't outrun them," she muttered, "but we can try to outsmart them. We'll need more than smarts to survive this," Greg snapped, his voice trembling, but Martinez wasn't listening. She had an idea, a desperate, risky plan, that might just work. The gate had been a prison, and it wasn't just a door, it was a connection, a gateway between their world and the unknown. If they could find a way to use it, maybe they could turn the tables on the creatures hunting them, but first, they had to get to it. The shuttle shuddered again, a warning light flashing in her peripheral vision. Something was approaching fast. Martinez could feel it now, that presence, a dark weight pulling at the edges of the ship's shields. "They were here. They've found us," one of the engineers whispered, barely able to mask the fear in his voice. "It's only a matter of time." The shuttle's sensors flared to life, showing the shadow in the distance, a massive, formless shape, cloaked in darkness, undulating like an ocean of shadows. It was the same creature they had seen before, only now it was much larger, a grotesque collection of tendrils and shifting masses that defied all laws of nature. It was not just one being anymore, it was an entire force, an army, and it was hunting them. Martinez gritted her teeth. "We don't have time for this. We need to get to the gate fast." With trembling hands, she diverted the shuttle's course toward the planet. The gate was still there, hidden beneath the surface, but it was their only chance. If they could somehow make it back to the surface, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tables on the creatures. The shuttle lurched as it changed direction, the sound of strained engines filling the cabin. "What are you doing?" Greg shouted. "You're heading straight for it. The gate's still open, it's going to suck us in." Martinez didn't reply. She couldn't afford to explain her plan. They had to make it to the planet before the creatures could stop them. She adjusted the shuttle's trajectory, aiming for a remote part of the surface, far from the site where they had opened the gate. They couldn't risk getting too close to the gate again, not with the creatures already awake and hunting them. As the shuttle hurtled back toward Valoris, the shadow in the distance grew larger. The creature was closing in, its movements rapid and purposeful. The tendrils extended, reaching for them as if it could sense their desperation, their fear. The creature had control of the space around them, manipulating the very fabric of reality. It was toying with them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Martinez swallowed hard, sweat dripping down her face as she clenched the shuttle's controls tighter. The ground of Valeris appeared below them, vast and empty, as though the planet itself had been abandoned long ago. The crash landing wouldn't be easy, but it was their only option. She could feel the heavy pulse of the gate in her chest as they neared the surface. It was calling to them, like a siren, a deep, terrifying pool that threatened to drag them into its depths. Hold on, Martinez shouted as the shuttle plunged through the atmosphere. The engines screamed in protest. As the shuttle raced toward the planet's surface, Martinez's mind was working at lightning speed, calculating the angles, the speed, the distance. It was the only thing she could focus on if she lost control now. They were all doomed. The planet's surface rushed toward them, and with a final deafening crash, the shuttle slammed into the ground. Metal groaned, and alarms blared. But they had made it, for now. Martinez quickly unstrapped herself, glancing around at her team. They were battered and bruised, but alive. The shuttle had held together long enough to get them to safety, but for how long? The creatures were still coming, and they were getting closer. We need to get to the gate, Martinez said, standing up and grabbing her equipment. Now the team hesitated, but there was no time to waste. The shadow was already descending, its tendrils snaking toward them, as if it had known the shuttle would land here. Martinez looked at the others, her heart pounding in her chest. If we don't make it to the gate, we're all dead, do you understand? She said, her voice low but filled with determination. They didn't need another word. The team quickly gathered their gear, and with one last look at the shuttle, they started moving. The landscape around them was barren, the ground cracked and dry, as if the planet itself had died long ago. The only thing that stood out was the faint outline of the gate, still hidden beneath the surface, waiting for them. Martinez didn't look back as they made their way toward the gate. She couldn't afford to. The creatures were close now, and there was only one chance to survive. They had awakened something that shouldn't have been touched, and now they were paying the price. But she wasn't going to let them die without a fight. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the team pushed forward, their every step filled with a sense of urgency. The barren landscape of Valeris stretched out before them, desolate and unforgiving. The air felt thick, charged with an unknown energy, as though the planet itself was alive, watching them. Martinez led the way, her eyes scanning the horizon, searching for the gate, the last hope they had of surviving what they had unleashed. They had no time to waste. The shadow, that dark force they had awakened, was closing in, and it was only a matter of time before it reached them. The creatures were relentless, hunting them like prey, and there was nothing in their arsenal that could stop them. All they had was the Gaetan ancient power they barely understood, but the gate was no longer just a doorway. It was a beacon, a signal to something far worse than they could imagine. Martinez pushed forward, her mind racing. What had they unleashed? What did the gate truly hold? The team had no answers, only fear and uncertainty. As they neared the location of the gate, her heart began to race. The closer they got, the stronger the pull. It wasn't just the power of the gate, it was the creatures, too. They could feel them, feel their presence growing stronger with every passing second. We're almost there, Martinez said, her voice strained but determined. Stay focused. We can't afford to fall behind. The team nodded, though their faces were pale with fear. No one spoke as they continued through the rocky terrain, each step bringing them closer to the unknown. It felt like an eternity had passed since they first landed on Valeris, and with every second, the weight of their actions pressed down on them. They had woken something ancient and deadly, something that had been buried for a reason, and now they had to face the consequences. As they approached the site of the gate, the ground seemed to ripple, as though the earth itself was reacting to their presence. The once solid, stable ground now felt unstable, as if something beneath the surface was stirring, ready to break free. The air grew colder, and the wind began to howl, carrying with it an ominous energy that made their skin crawl there. One of the engineers whispered, pointing ahead, through the dust and the fading light. The outline of the gate became visible. It was massive, towering over them like an ancient monument. The symbols on its surface still glowed faintly, though the light now seemed dimmer, as if the gate was growing weaker with every passing moment. We're too late, Greg muttered, his voice barely audible. It's closing the gate. It's shutting down. Martinez's heart sank as she looked at the gate. He was right. The energy that had once radiated from it was fading. The dark vortex, the one that had nearly swallowed them earlier, was nowhere to be seen. The creatures, the beings they had unleashed, were getting closer, and now it seemed like the only hope they had was slipping away. We can't let it close, Martinez said, her voice filled with urgency. We have to open it again. We have no other choice. Her team exchanged nervous glances. Opening the gate again meant risking everything they had worked so hard to uncover. But what choice did they have? The creatures were coming, and they were getting stronger. There was no running, no hiding. If they didn't open the gate and find a way to control it, they were all doomed. Help me, Martinez said, her voice steady but desperate. We need to reactivate the power core If we can just get the energy flowing again, we can force the gate to open. The team moved quickly, setting up their equipment around the base of the gate. The ground beneath them rumbled again, stronger this time, and Martinez felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure how much time they had left, but it wasn't much. She watched as her team worked, their hands shaking as they connected cables and adjusted their equipment. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the weight of their actions hanging in the air. Every second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind them. The ground shook violently as a massive shadow loomed over them. They turned, their hearts stopping as they saw the creatures emerging from the darkness, their forms towering and grotesque, their tendrils lashing out with horrifying speed. "They're here," Greg gasped, his voice full of fear. The creatures moved toward them with purpose, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The shadows that had once seemed distant and intangible were now solid, real, and they were coming for them. Martinez could hear their movements, like 1,000 whispers. In the dark, they were everywhere, closing in with terrifying precision. "We need to move," Martinez shouted, grabbing the nearest engineer by the arm. "Get the core online, now." But just as the words left her mouth, the ground beneath them began to split, the earth cracking open as if something was trying to escape. The gate, once dormant, now seemed to pulse with life, its symbols glowing brighter than ever before. The creatures hesitated, their dark forms flickering as if the gate was rejecting them. It was then that Martinez realized the gate wasn't just a doorway. It was a barrier, a force that had kept the creatures imprisoned for centuries. And now, as the creatures closed in, it was fighting back. "We're almost there," one of the engineers cried. Just a few more seconds. The creatures seemed to sense their success. One of them let out a horrifying screech, its tendrils reaching toward the team, but the energy from the gate surged, sending out a shockwave that knocked the creatures back. "Now," Martinez screamed. The energy core finally came to life, and with a loud, echoing roar, the gate flared to life once more. The creatures recoiled, but they weren't giving up. They were relentless, and now they were angry. Martinez didn't hesitate. She grabbed a weapon, her eyes fixed on the swirling vortex at the center of the gate. The only way out was through. They had opened it, and now they had to face whatever waited on the other side. As the shadows of the creatures stretched across the surface of the planet, Martinez and her team stood ready, knowing that they were no longer running from the monsters. They were going to fight back. The gate's energy pulsed around them, a living force, flickering in and out like a heartbeat. The creatures were now fully aware that the barrier they had been trying to tear down had somehow strengthened again. With every pulse, the air around the gate grew heavier, and the shadowy figures began to waver, their forms flickering as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to warp. Martinez's mind raced. This was not just an ancient gate, it was something far more complex, something tied to the very essence of the universe itself. "We don't have much time," one of the engineers shouted over the deafening hum of the gate's rising energy. "The gate's stabilizing, but it won't last long. We need to get inside, now." The dark figures moved closer, undeterred by the surge of energy. The creatures, once content with simply stalking their prey, now seemed desperate. Their movements were faster, more coordinated, as if they had no intention of letting anyone escape. The air crackled with anticipation, and Martinez could feel the weight of their presence bearing down on her team. There was no turning back now. "We're almost there," she said through gritted teeth, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to break through. "We can use the gate to our advantage, but we have to act fast. We're not just dealing with these things anymore, we're dealing with something much bigger." Her team nodded, though they looked just as terrified as she felt. They had no idea what lay beyond the gate, no idea what kind of power had been sealed away for so long. The creatures they faced weren't just mindless monsters, they were ancient, powerful, and driven by a single purpose: destruction. But what would happen if they stepped through the gate? What would they find on the other side? The shadows moved closer, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The creatures had already torn through most of the perimeter defenses, and it wouldn't be long before they breached the final barrier. The shuttle was too far to reach. There was no safety left. The gate was their only hope. Martinez ran toward the gate, her team following closely behind. The energy in the air grew stronger, crackling with a force that seemed to seep into her very bones. The symbols on the gate began to shift, glowing brighter with each passing moment, as if reacting to their presence. It was both odd and terrifying. This was a gateway to something beyond comprehension, something so old, so powerful, it had been locked away for a reason. "Get ready," Martinez called out. her voice barely audible over the growing hum of the gate. "Once we pass through, there's no turning back. We're going into the unknown." The team braced themselves, their weapons ready, their faces filled with a mix of fear and determination. As they approached the threshold, the shadows of the creatures behind them seemed to claw at the very fabric of space itself, reaching out, trying to drag them back into the darkness. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Martinez could feel her breath catch in her chest. The gate was alive, pulling them in, calling them to enter. But before they could step through, a deep, otherworldly voice echoed in their minds. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was as if it had come from within, from the very core of the gate itself. "You cannot escape. You have opened the door. You have released what was never meant to be free. And now, you will suffer the consequences." The words vibrated in their skulls, filling their heads with a sense of impending doom. It was not just a warning. It was a promise. Martinez gritted her teeth. "We don't have a choice," she muttered. "We have to go through. We have no other way out." Without another word, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the gate. The world around her seemed to shatter in an instant, the air around them rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The sound of the creatures' screeches grew fainter, replaced by a strange, unsettling silence. She glanced back at her team, all of them now stepping through the gate, one by one. As they crossed into the unknown, they were hit with a rush of overwhelming sensations. The world around them seemed to stretch and twist, bending at impossible angles. They weren't on Val anymore, they weren't even in their own galaxy. The stars above them looked different, unfamiliar, and the air felt thick with an energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Martinez looked around, trying to make sense of their surroundings. They were standing on a vast, alien landscape. The sky above them was a swirling mass of dark purple and red, dotted with strange, glowing lights. The ground beneath them was a mixture of cracked stone and strange, shimmering material that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "What is this place?" Greg whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. Martinez didn't answer. She was too focused on the horizon. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of what looked like a structure, ancient and towering, surrounded by a faint blue glow. It was not a natural formation. It was something built, something ancient. "We need to get to that structure," Martinez said, her voice steady. "It might be our only chance." They moved quickly, the weight of their surroundings pressing down on them. The air felt thicker here, heavier, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with an energy that was both alien and familiar at the same time. As they moved closer to the structure, the ground beneath them trembled once more, and the faint sound of growling echoed in the distance. "They're coming," Greg said, his voice barely above a whisper. Martinez nodded, her grip tightening around her weapon. She had no idea what lay ahead, but they didn't have a choice. They had to reach the structure before it was too late. Whatever had been sealed away for so long was now free, and the creatures were no longer their only problem. The very fabric of the universe was shifting, and they were caught in the middle of it. With one final glance at her team, Martinez began to run toward the structure. They were entering a place beyond time, beyond their understanding, and the creatures were not the only threat they would face. Whatever lay ahead was something far more dangerous, something that had been waiting for them to open the door. The structure loomed ahead, growing larger with each desperate step they took. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the sky above them seemed to crack and twist, as if reality itself was unraveling. Martinez could feel the weight of the air growing heavier with every passing moment. It was as if the very fabric of existence was reacting to their presence, like they didn't belong in this place. This was not a world meant for humans, not a place they were ever supposed to see. The closer they got to the structure, the more they felt the pull, the energy pulling at their minds, whispering to them in a language they couldn't understand. The air around them buzzed with an ancient power, something far beyond their comprehension. Every step seemed to lead them deeper into the heart of the unknown, and every instinct screamed at them to turn back, but they couldn't. They didn't have a choice. The creatures from the gate were still following them, and now, even worse, they were in a realm where the rules of reality didn't seem to apply. "We're almost there," Martinez said, her voice steady, though she felt the doubt gnawing at her insides. "Stay focused. We can't stop now." Greg, who had been silent for the last few minutes, looked up at her with wide eyes, his face pale. "Carla, do you feel that? This place, it's alive. The air, the ground, everything. It's watching us." She didn't need to say anything. She felt it too. It wasn't just the creatures that were hunting them anymore. It was the very world around them. They were intruders in a place that had been locked away for eons, and now, they had disturbed something far more dangerous than anything they could imagine. That as they neared the structure, a deep, rumbling sound reverberated through the ground, followed by a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from every direction. The creatures had found them, and now, they were closing in. The team turned toward the sound, their weapons raised, ready to face whatever horrors this realm held. But what they saw wasn't what they expected. The creatures that had been chasing them were no longer the dark, shadowy figures they had first encountered. Now they were something else larger, more grotesque, their bodies writhing with tendrils and sharp, glinting teeth. They were no longer just creatures of darkness, they were manifestations of the very place they had entered, twisted and warped by the power of the realm. "They're not just hunting us," one of the engineers said, his voice shaking. "They're part of this place. They belong here." Martinez's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what they were up against now, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. The creatures weren't simply enemies, they were an extension of this realm's malevolent energy, beings created to defend it, to keep outsiders from trespassing. "We can't fight them here," Martinez said, her voice tight. "We need to get inside that structure, now." Without another word, she broke into a sprint, the others following closely behind. The creatures shrieked behind them, their growls growing louder with every passing second. The air seemed to distort around them, bending as if the very fabric of space was warping to the creature's will. Martinez pushed herself harder, her legs burning as she ran, but the structure was still too far away. The creatures were gaining, and she could hear the sound of their twisted forms snapping through the air behind her. The whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent, urging her to stop, to surrender, but she refused to listen. They were almost there, just a few more meters. With a final burst of speed, she reached the massive doorway of the structure and threw herself inside, pulling the others in after her. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening noise, and for a moment, all was still. The air inside was thick with an ancient oppressive energy, and the walls around them seemed to pulse with life, as though the very stones were alive. The structure was vast, more like a temple than a building, its walls covered in strange symbols and carvings that shifted and changed as they watched. Martinez's mind reeled, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, but it was impossible. This place defied logic, defied reason. "We're safe," Greg said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. For now, Martinez didn't answer. She couldn't afford to relax, not yet. The creatures were still out there, and this place, this realm, was far from safe. They had entered something far more dangerous than they realized. The creatures weren't the true threat. No, it was the energy of this place, the force that had created the gate, that had trapped the creatures, and now, it was turning on them. "This place," Martinez whispered, her eyes scanning the walls. "It's not just a prison, it's a trap." A sudden, violent tremor shook the ground beneath them, followed by a low, ominous sound that seemed to come from the very core of the structure. The walls began to glow, and the air thickened with a heavy, suffocating pressure. It was as if the structure itself was waking up, responding to their presence. "They're coming," Greg said, his voice barely audible. "They're not going to stop." Martinez nodded, her mind racing. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew they had to be ready. Whatever the gate had been, whatever this structure was, it was more than just a door. It was a key to something far older and more powerful than the creatures they had unleashed. And now, they were trapped, not just by the creatures, but by the very force that had created them. The universe was shifting around them, and they had no idea what would come next. "We have to find a way to control this," Martinez said, her voice filled with a new, desperate resolve, "or we'll never make it out." The ground trembled, again, louder this time, and the walls of the structure seemed to close in around them. Whatever lay ahead, it was coming fast, and they had no way of knowing if they would survive. What was about to happen? But one thing was certain. They had just unlocked a door to a nightmare they couldn't escape.